Look around you right now. There's a clock almost everywhere you turn. The corner of your phone, your wrist, the wall, the microwave, the car, the little numbers glowing at the bottom of your screen. You check them 100 times a day without even thinking. What time is it? How long until the meeting? How many days until the weekend? Your whole life runs on a grid of hours, minutes, seconds, days, months, years. Now in your mind, take all of it away. Every clock, every calendar, every number. You don't know what hour it is. You don't know what day it is. You don't know the year. And here's the strangest part of all. You do not even know how old you are. Welcome to almost the entire history of being human. So here is a question that sounds simple and turns out to be enormous. How did ancient humans tell time? Because time is not a thing you can see or touch or hold. It has no smell, no weight, no color. And yet our ancestors had to master it or die. When to move, when to hunt, when the animals would come, when the cold would return, when the river would flood. A creature that cannot read time starves in the winter it never saw coming. So humans became time readers, tens of thousands of years before the first clock was ever built. And the way they did it is one of the most beautiful, patient, and forgotten skills our species ever had. Let's rebuild it, from nothing. Start with the most obvious clock in the world, the one hanging right over your head. The sun. For an ancient human, the sun was not just light and warmth. It was the master clock, the great hand sweeping across the sky, and everyone could read it. It rises in the east, it climbs, it sits at its highest point, it sinks, it sets in the west, and it does this, without fail, every single day of your entire life. That is the first and most important thing time ever gave humans. A rhythm you could absolutely trust. Day, night, forever. But you can do better than just up and down. Watch the shadows. When the sun is low in the morning, shadows are long, stretching far across the ground. As the sun climbs, the shadows shrink. At the exact middle of the day, when the sun is at its very highest, shadows are at their shortest. Then, as the sun falls toward evening, the shadows grow long again, pointing the other way. A stick in the ground, a shadow crawling around it. That is a clock. The first clock was not built. It was noticed. Every rock, every tree, every person was a shadow clock, quietly telling the time to anyone patient enough to look. And this mattered enormously for the thing humans do best, cooperating. Imagine you need to meet your hunting group, but there are no watches, no phones, no way to say, "See you at 3. So what do you say instead? You say, "Meet me at the split rock when the sun is highest." Or, "We leave when the sun touches the top of that hill." Ancient appointments were written in shadows and landmarks. The whole tribe ran on a shared, silent agreement about where the sun would be. And astonishingly, it worked, for 100,000 years. But the sun only gives you one day, and a single day is far too small a clock for the really important questions. Because the questions that decided whether you lived or died were not about hours. They were about months and seasons and years. And for those, humans looked up at night to a second great clock, one that was slower, stranger, and even more powerful. The moon. The moon is the most dramatic thing in the night sky, and it does something the sun never does. It changes shape. A thin sliver, a growing curve, a perfect bright circle, then shrinking again, back to darkness and gone. And then, a few nights later, the sliver returns, and the whole thing begins again. This cycle takes about 29 or 30 days, which means the moon is not a day clock. The moon is a month clock. It is nature's own calendar hanging in the sky, resetting itself over and over, roughly 12 times a year. And ancient humans watched it obsessively. Because if you can count moons, you can predict the future. 3 moons until the herds return. 5 moons until the berries ripen. 2 moons until the cold comes. Counting moons let a human see past the horizon of a single day into weeks and months yet to come. But the moon hid a nasty little trap, one that would torment calendar makers for thousands of years. 12 moons do not quite add up to 1 full year of seasons. They fall short by about 11 days every single year. So if you build your whole calendar on the moon, it slowly drifts out of step with the sun. And after a few years, your spring moon is arriving in the middle of winter. Ancient peoples fought this in clever ways, slipping in an extra 13th moon every few years to drag the calendar back in line with the seasons. That quiet battle between the moon's month and the sun's year is one of the oldest maths problems humanity ever faced, and you can still feel its ghost in why our modern months are the slightly messy lengths they are. The moon gave them more than a calendar, too. Along the coasts, it pulled the tides in and out, twice a day, in a rhythm tied to its phases, and anyone who gathered shellfish or fished the shallows had to read the moon to know when the sea would pull back and lay out its food. And the moon's roughly monthly cycle echoed another rhythm close to home. The cycle of fertility in women's bodies, so that in culture after culture the moon became bound up with birth and blood and the deep machinery of life itself. And we have proof, extraordinary proof, that they were tracking these cycles, deep in the Stone Age. In Africa, archaeologists found a small piece of baboon bone, carved with a row of neat notches. It is around 44,000 years old, and it is one of the oldest measuring tools ever discovered. And in another bone, from the same part of the world, there are groups of scratches that many researchers believe track the phases of the moon. Think about that. Tens of thousands of years ago, someone sat down and carved a mark for each passing night, keeping a tally, building a physical record of time itself. That little notched bone might be the oldest calendar on Earth. Before writing, before farming, before cities, a human was already counting the days. But the moon and the sun together still leave a gap. Because the thing that truly ruled an ancient human's life was bigger and slower than any month. It was the great wheel of the seasons. The seasons are the most important clock in all of human history because getting them wrong means death. Plant too early, and frost kills your crop. Move too late, and the herds are gone and the winter traps you with no food. So how do you predict a season that is still months away, when every day looks pretty much like the last? The first answer was to read the living world itself, which is one enormous humming clock. The birds arrive and leave at the same times each year. Certain flowers open. The buds swell on the trees. A particular fish runs up the river to spawn. The first frost silvers the grass. The first warm wind melts the snow. Ancient humans held a vast, detailed almanac of these signs in their heads, passed down through the elders, an encyclopedia of when the white flowers bloom, the fish are coming, and when the geese fly south, the cold is 3 weeks away. They did not have a calendar on the wall. They had the entire landscape as their calendar, and they read it fluently, in a way almost nobody alive today still can. But nature's signs can lie. A warm spell can trick the buds early. A strange year can send the birds late. And when you have bet your survival and later your entire harvest on getting the timing right, you want something more certain than a hopeful guess. You want the sky. And you find that the sun itself is a seasonal clock, if you know how to read it. Here is the secret ancient humans figured out. The sun does not rise in exactly the same spot every day. Through the year, its rising point slowly drifts along the horizon, north, then south, then back again. On one special day, midsummer, it rises at its most northern point and the day is longest. On another, midwinter, it rises at its most southern point, and the day is shortest. These are the solstices, the great turning points of the year. And if you can catch that exact moment, You have found a fixed anchor in time. You know precisely where you are in the endless wheel of the seasons. So humans did something staggering. They built machines to catch the sun. Not machines of metal and gears, but machines of earth and stone. In the far north of Scotland, there is a site called Warren Field, a row of ancient pits dug into the ground around 10,000 years ago that seems to track the months of the moon and line up with the midwinter sunrise, a Stone Age calendar older than the pyramids by thousands of years. In the Egyptian desert, at a place called Nabta Playa, stones were arranged to mark the coming of the summer sun and the life-giving rains. And of course, there is the most famous of them all, Stonehenge. Whatever else that great circle was, it is aligned with breathtaking precision to the solstices, so that on the longest and shortest days of the year, the sun rises or sets exactly through its giant stone frame. These were not just temples. They were calendars you could walk inside. Vast, permanent instruments built by people with no writing and no metal, purely to answer one desperate question. When is the season going to change? And then there were the stars. Because the night sky is not random and it is not fixed. The stars wheel overhead through the night and slowly shift across the whole year, so that different stars rule different seasons. Ancient people learned the patterns by heart and used them like a giant, glittering clock and calendar. The most famous example comes from Egypt. Every year the Nile would flood, bringing the water that made life in the desert possible. And the Egyptians noticed that the flood arrived right around the time a particular brilliant star, the one we call Sirius, first reappeared in the dawn sky after being hidden for weeks. That star's return was the alarm bell for the entire civilization. The stars were a calendar written in light, and reading them could mean the difference between a full harvest and a nation starving. And this is where telling time turned into something more than survival. It turned into power. Because if only a handful of people knew how to read the sky, then those people could seem to predict the future. A priest who could stand up and announce with total confidence that the flood was coming in 10 days, or that the longest day of the year had arrived, looked less like a scholar and more like a magician who could command the heavens. All across the ancient world, the keepers of the calendar, the astronomer priests, became some of the most powerful people alive, precisely because they held the secret of when. Knowledge of time was knowledge of the future, and knowledge of the future was authority over everyone who did not have it. And nothing showed that power like the sky's most terrifying trick, the eclipse. Imagine you have never read a single book, and one afternoon the sun simply begins to vanish, swallowed by a creeping darkness in the middle of the day. The birds falling silent, the air turning cold. To most ancient people, this was pure horror, the sun being devoured, the world perhaps ending. But a rare few, watching the long, slow patterns of the heavens over generations, began to notice that even eclipses follow hidden rhythms, and can, in time, be predicted. And a person who could calmly foretell the day the sun would go dark and then watch it happen exactly as promised was not just telling the time, they were holding a piece of the universe in their hands. Now here is something that most people never stop to think about. All this time, ancient humans were also carrying a clock that they could never see and never take off, a clock built into their own bodies. Deep inside you, right now, is a biological rhythm scientists call the circadian clock. It runs on a cycle of roughly 24 hours, and it controls when you feel sleepy, when you feel awake, when you feel hungry, when your body temperature rises and falls. It is set every day by light. Sunrise winds it up. Darkness winds it down. Ancient humans lived in perfect tune with this inner clock. They woke with the light, worked and hunted in the day, and slept in the dark, not because a schedule told them to, but because their own bodies did. In a world with no artificial light, no glowing screens, no all-night anything, The body's clock and the sun's clock were the same clock. You did not check the time. You felt it. And their sleep itself may have been shaped by the length of the night in a way that would feel strange to us. In the long, dark hours before electric light, there is real evidence that people did not always sleep in one solid block the way we try to. Instead, many slept in 2 shifts. A first sleep, soon after dark, then a quiet hour or 2 awake in the deep of the night, tending the fire, talking softly, before drifting into a second sleep until dawn. That midnight wakefulness was not insomnia. It was simply the natural shape of a night ruled by darkness rather than by a bedside clock telling you it is far too early to be awake. Which brings us to one of the most mind-bending differences between them and us. Ancient humans, for the most part, did not know their own age. Think about how strange that is. There were no birth records, no calendars ticking off the years, no candles on a cake. If nobody is counting the years, then a number for your age simply does not exist. Instead, age was not a number. It was a stage. You were a child. Then you were old enough to hunt or to bear children. Then you were a full adult. Then you were an elder, one of the precious few who had survived long enough to hold the memories and the wisdom of the group. Your worth was not, I am 34. Your worth was, I have seen many winters. Time was measured not in numbers, but in life itself. But as humans settled down and villages grew into towns and towns into cities, they needed something the sun and the moon could not easily give them. They needed to slice the day into smaller, sharper pieces. They needed the hour. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to really carve up the day. They took the daylight and divided it into 12 parts, and the night into 12 more. Which is a big part of why, to this day, we live with 24 hours. To measure those daytime hours, they perfected the shadow clock and later the beautiful sundial, a dial with a blade that casts a shadow creeping across marked lines as the sun moves. It was elegant and accurate and completely useless the moment the sun went down or a cloud rolled in. So they invented something cleverer, to tell time in the dark. The water clock. The idea is simple and brilliant. Water drips out of a container at a steady rate, and as the level falls past marked lines inside, you can read how much time has passed, day or night, sun or no sun. For thousands of years, dripping water was one of humanity's best ways to measure the passing hours. Time, quite literally, flowing away drop by drop. And the water clock was only the beginning of a whole family of clever tricks for measuring time by watching something disappear at a steady pace. There was the candle clock, a candle marked with rings, so that as it burned down past each line, you knew another hour had melted away. There were incense clocks, sticks of fragrant powder that smoldered along a marked path, sometimes even changing scent to announce the hour. And to read the night sky itself, Egyptian priests tracked special groups of stars that rose in sequence through the dark, using the heavens as a giant clock face, so that watching the right star climb over the horizon told them exactly how deep into the night they were. Fire, water, sand, and stars, all pressed into service, all trying to catch the same invisible thing slipping endlessly through everyone's fingers. And why do we cut an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds? Blame the ancient Babylonians, who loved to count in a system based on the number 60. That ancient obsession, thousands of years old, is fossilized right there in your watch and in the 360 degrees of a circle. Even our 7-day week is an echo of the ancient sky. 7 days, many believe, for the 7 moving lights the ancients could see and track, the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets. Every time you glance at a clock or a calendar, you are reading a message written by people who died thousands of years ago, staring up at the same sky you never look at. Now step back and try to feel what their world was actually like. For almost all of human history, time was not a straight line of numbered years marching from a fixed beginning. There was no 10,000 BC, no dates, no timeline. Time was a set of circles. The circle of the day, the circle of the moon, the great circle of the seasons turning and turning. And beyond that, a deep, misty past that was simply the time of the ancestors, with no numbers attached at all. People lived inside a kind of endless rolling present, tied to the sky above them and the seasons around them, rather than to a ticking count of years. The very idea of pinning history to an exact numbered timeline is astonishingly recent. So come back now to where we started. To you and your phone and the little glowing numbers you check 100 times a day. That number is the end of an unbelievable journey. It began with a caveman noticing that a shadow moves. It ran through someone carving notches into a bone to count the moons. It passed through people dragging enormous stones across the land to catch a single sunrise, through Egyptians dripping water in the dark, through Babylonians counting in 60s, all the way down to the atomic clocks of today, which measure a second so precisely they would not lose or gain one over millions of years. 30,000 years of humans staring at the sky, straining to answer one question, when, so that we could finally shrink the entire cosmos down into a few glowing digits in your pocket. But here is the thing worth remembering. Ancient humans did not have less time than we do. They had a different relationship with it. They were not slaves to a ticking clock or a packed calendar. Their time was patient and cyclical and deeply tied to the living world, to the arc of the sun, the phases of the moon, the turning of the seasons, and the quiet, steady clock beating away inside their own chests. They did not check the time. They lived inside it. So the next time you feel rushed and hunted and squeezed by the clock, remember that the clock is something we built. For nearly all of human history, the only clocks that existed were the sky over your head and the pulse inside your body. And maybe, just maybe, those ancient humans, who never once knew what time it was, understood something about time that we, with all our perfect glowing numbers, have almost completely forgotten. Thanks for watching. If you love the big questions hiding inside the ordinary things around you, subscribe and stick around, because next time we are digging into another strange, forgotten corner of the world of ancient humans.